G'day, ZiggyD here, and welcome back for some more coverage on SKYFORGE. In this video I want to talk about world design, aesthetics, exploration, and basically how the quests and everything bring the world together. What is the design? What exactly do you do when you move about the world? Now this is one area overall where I think SKYFORGE has really let down. Aesthetically the game is frankly beautiful. It's not quite as wow-worthy as I had with some moments with something like Guild Wars 2 or when I was flying around the eastern continents of Arcade. There weren't quite as many of those, whoa, the scope and beauty of this land is like mind-blowing. I didn't really have any moments like that, but overall the game is very attractive, and there have been a few moments where I had to stop and just do a slow pan. One of my favorite things from yesterday's live stream actually was seeking out different locations where the rays of sunlight would filter through the leaves and things like that, just to basically plot my character and dance a little with the UI turned off. It's very satisfying seeing the lighting effects in the game. You know, technically the graphics I think are pretty fantastic. There are some sort of noise issues in some of the zones where things kind of don't render together perfectly, but overall the game looks fantastic. So it's a shame then that the game doesn't really have any exploration to speak of. Now the game features an auto run to the next quest feature, so essentially if you see a quest marker on your game screen you can point, aim at it and press spacebar and your character will automatically run there. Now usually in MMOs with exploration, I call this feature a cardinal sin. It's the worst of the worst because it makes everybody run the exact same paths and it limits any sort of exploration. And humans have a natural tendency to take the path of least resistance, and if there's a way they can auto run to the next quest to continue progressing the character, they will do that. Now it's not an issue in this game, and that's because there's virtually no exploration in this game whatsoever. So the auto running, you never really feel like you're missing anything because there's not anything to miss. So SKYFORGE is a heavily instanced game. The majority of missions that I've done in the first 20 hours of gameplay have been 1 to 3 player instances, kind of like mini dungeons that were extremely linear. If you look at the kind of map overlay of one of these dungeons just here, you can see that there's some tiny little offshoots, but for the most part it's just run point A to point B while killing and grabbing and doing some things along the way. Now in my 20 hours of play so far, there have been 2 larger zones. These are kind of what you would expect more out of a traditional MMO style quest hub. Now these zones are not as large as the worlds in other MMOs, and they aren't seamless. Like, these are things that you fly to around the world. And this whole like flying to different locations around the world, I think it makes sense in this sort of sci-fi fantasy universe. But it does mean that the world does feel very segmented and instanced. Now there's some positives and negatives to this. As I said, it really seems to limit exploration because there's no kind of moving from one zone to the next and finding some interesting things along the way. There's no like seeking out interesting sites or anything like that because you're essentially flying to all of these different places or actually teleporting to these different places. The positives of this though are that because it's a game where you can fly large distances without having to run to them, there's a pretty good variety and diversity in the locations that you will visit. You go from like wharves to, you know, manufacturing factories to forests to floating fortresses in the sky. There's a really good variety to the different locations, and this is something that would be a little bit harder to build with a seamless world. Now I was watching a Force video this morning actually just before I made this, and he was covering a similar topic about his sort of first impressions of the game, and he, I think, very rightfully pointed out that the first impressions of this game are not so good because for the first 8 hours or so, you're just doing these little tiny missions, like you're just doing these smaller zones that are extremely linear, and the game feels like a corridor game. Now, it does later open up into some of these larger regional missions that I talked about, and these have a lot more sort of, you know, larger, there's a lot of missions in them, there's a lot of different kill quests and stuff in them, and there's a little bit more exploration going on there. You can run around a much larger area, and you can see other players running around, and it starts to feel like an MMO. But these do come into the game entirely too late. I think by the 8-hour mark, if you haven't experienced any of these sort of open areas with a lot of players in them, then you're going to start to think, what is actually going on with this game? Is this a single player game? And it does feel like that for the first 8 hours or so of the game. Now I'm 20 hours in and there's only been 2 of these regional zones so far, and there has been a lot of repetition in this game, guys. I've done each of these smaller missions, there's something like 6 or so of them. I've done each of these smaller missions something like 4 times, and the actual storyline quests bring you back to previous missions that you've completed. Now backtracking isn't anything new in an MMO, but the amount of backtracking in this game and the amount you go back and have to redo the same missions to talk to a different NPC within that mission zone is kind of astounding, really. Now, each time you repeat a zone, you kind of fill up a progression meter, and the zones get a little bit harder, some extra things become available in them, sometimes extra paths open up, sometimes there's more enemies or some little tiny side things you do, but it's really small changes, so it's kind of like, it reminds you of like a single player action game where you might go back and repeat a mission to try and beat your highest score, and maybe things get a little bit harder in sort of like a new game plus mode. It's kind of got that sort of vibe to it. Overall, I feel like the theme of this game, this sci-fi fantasy mix, is really good. It's a really interesting sort of theme, and the actual look of the game conveys that theme really well, and it's really satisfying seeing some of these locations like these floating sky fortresses and space stations, and the light filtering through the leaves in the forested regions. There's some really beautiful locations. It's a shame that you really don't get to explore those locations, you know, anything more than just sort of running point A to point B, that there's no real, like, reward for exploration, there's no real, like, exploration missions, there's no real sort of incentive to run off of the beaten path, and in fact, there's no off of the beaten path in the first place. So as I was saying, this is something that I feel like lets the game down overall. There are some positives to it, like I mentioned, where you get a little bit more variety in the zones you feature. The problem then is that there's so much backtracking. It's nice to have this variety, but when there's so much backtracking when you're doing the missions 4 times over, it means that, you know, that variety sort of starts to become a distant memory very quickly because you start to see those same locations over and over again. So guys, again, this is a beta and I am only 20 hours in. I do hope that it opens up more and more further on. I believe I've just sort of unlocked one of the first longer dungeons. It's 40 minutes. A lot of them at this point have been 10 to 20 to 25 minutes. So I'm interested to see what this next location is when I try it out today on the live stream. But as usual guys, I'll continue my coverage of this game and breaking it down for you guys so that you can decide whether it's a game you're going to be interested in as it goes closer to launch. Anyway guys, if you have any questions about SKYFORGE, feel free to ask in the comments below. That's it for now. I'm ZiggyD, and thanks for watching. Guys, there's a little addendum at the end of this video. I kind of just wanted to ask what you thought about this style of coverage. I think I want to cover games, you know, fewer games more in depth. I like this idea of, over the course of a week, making an introduction to a video to a game, breaking down each of the different mechanics, and then doing a final thoughts or review at the end of that sort of week. I'm sort of testing this theory or this content style out with SKYFORGE, and I want to just know what you guys think about it. What would you like to see in that sort of detailed coverage? Do you think it's worth doing detailed coverage on new and upcoming games like this? Anyway guys, just a little bit of a request for feedback, so feel free to leave that in the comments below as well, and I'll check that out because I really appreciate it. I'm trying something a little bit new here. Anyway guys, I'll catch you guys next time.